the newsagents.
If you don't want to go to Rwanda, then don't come to this country. It's that simple.
That was GB News' Lee Anderson opining on Rwanda, except that he's also an MP, Conservative MP. He's also Deputy Chair of the Conservative Party. And what he's expressing and what he's expressed and what he has signed is in absolute contradiction to government policy, which kind of raises a question. How can he possibly still be in his job as Deputy Chairman of the Conservative Party?
Lee Anderson is one of a kind, but he is not alone, because another Deputy Chairman, Brendan Clark-Smith, has also said he'll back amendments, and they are being joined by the former Prime Minister himself, Boris Johnson, who is also willing to give his support to some 60 or so, we think, rebels who are trying to change Rishi Sunak's mind. What's Rishi going to do about it? And is he ever going to sack anyone? Welcome to the Newsagents.
It's John.
It's Emily.
It's Lewis.
And in the House of Commons right now, as we sit here in the Newsagents studio, they are discussing the Rwanda bill and these amendments which Rishi Sunak does not want. And these amendments have been drafted on the right of the Conservative Party by people like Robert Jenrick, who was the immigration minister, and have got the support of a wide range of Conservative MPs, also kind of former Brexit rebels who are now allying themselves to this particular cause.
Yeah, this all relates to the safety of Rwanda, brackets, asylum and immigration bill. And a kind of potted history of this, you might remember that obviously the Rwanda policy itself has been sort of chugging through Conservative policy under Boris Johnson, briefly under Liz Truss, I suppose, then Rishi Sunak. The Supreme Court comes along at the end of last year and says it's not legal in the current form. We don't accept that Rwanda is a safe country. We think this will be subject and will potentially be a problem via the European Court of Human Rights. Sunak's response is to say, we will introduce new primary legislation which Parliament declares that Rwanda is a safe country, that the courts are wrong. That is already quite constitutionally and legally unusual. And Sunak's argument is that this bill basically goes as far as it is possible to go whilst getting right up to the threshold of what is legal under international law. His critics, led by, of all people, his former kind of chief ally in the Home Office, Robert Jenrick, are arguing that that is not the case, and they have tabled these series of amendments today which toughen the bill further and basically reduce things like the ability of potential people coming over, crossing into Britain, to litigate their case before the courts, reduces the length of time that they would have to do so. So it toughens it even further. Sunak's response is to say that is not legal and the whole thing will collapse if you pass these amendments.
Yeah, because the bill as things stand allows migrants to appeal if they face, I think it is, serious or irreversible harm if they're removed to Rwanda. And Jenrick is amongst the Tory rebels who are saying, we don't want to give them time. We do not want to allow time for people to appeal. That's where the system gets all clogged up. It's where it gets foggy. People just see them with a doctor's note or with an excuse for some reason or another, and then their appeal gets launched and then they never get off the ground. Rishi Sunak's answer to this is to say, well, we can't actually put the flights in the air because that would be breaking international law. We can't just carry on if these appeals are launched. But what we can do, and this morning Alex Chalk, his Justice Minister, wrote a ministerial statement to expand the work of judges. And so, I mean, talk about back of an envelope stuff. They've now announced 5,000 more sitting days of judges, 100 more support staff, 25 more rooms. They're talking about getting 150 judges to work around the clock over the weekends to try and combat these appeals that migrants might make. If you just think about that for one moment, we don't have emergency staff as it is working overtime. We don't have anyone doing that to bring down the NHS waiting lists. But suddenly we're putting all this effort into more judges just to try and deal with a scheme that doesn't even need to be put together in the first place?
Look, this is one of the most ridiculous aspects of the Rwanda policy. James Cleverly was absolutely right when he said this is one part of what the government is doing. And then he had to eat those words very quickly because, of course, it's the cornerstone now of what the government is doing. And this kind of symbolic idea of putting a few dozen people, and it will probably be a few dozen people, on a plane to Rwanda is now skewing the whole of government and the machinery of the Justice Department to service this. And you think of the backlog of cases there are in our courts currently.
It's not just government. It's not just the machinery of government. It's the machinery of the state, of the country.
It's the whole machinery of the criminal justice system is being of all the cases that are waiting to be heard.
Yeah.
And we're talking last week on the podcast about how difficult it will be to get justice for these sub postmasters and sub postmistresses, and how difficult that was. Well, screw that. 150 judges are going to be made available just to hear Rwanda appeals so that we can get them on a plane more quickly.
I mean, if it were that easy, it does rather beg the question, why weren't we doing it before?
Yeah,
why
exactly.
weren't we doing it?
Could we magic up another 150?
Yeah,
why
not
rape cases, perhaps?
Why not 300, 400? It's not as if they have to be trained over many, many years and literally apply their craft judiciously in every single case. But it's right. I mean, what you're saying, John, is right. I mean, what the government has done, and we've talked about this before, what Sunak has done in pressing ahead with this policy so robustly, in emphasising it so absolutely, is to, in fact, distract from the fact that, as Sunak does try and point out occasionally, the government doesn't, I mean, it has quite a bad story overall, but in the past year, it has made some progress. We now have a full calendar year from last year to compare with what happened the year before, and it is true, as Sunak says, arrivals are down roughly by a third. This month, until this weekend, there were no crossings over the channel. More to do with the weather, probably, than anything necessarily the government has done. But nonetheless, there is a different story that they could have told. Instead, what Sunak has done is create a political problem, create a litmus test against which your conservatism is judged. And what someone like Jenrick is doing, and, let's take him on face value, he's passionate about this cause now. He thinks that the bill, as he said today, isn't going to work without his amendments. But what he's clearly doing is leaning into this idea of his being tougher, more authoritarian, more conservative than other potential future leadership contenders would be in his backing of this plan. And that is why he is so robustly coming out for it in the Commons today.
So I guess where does it leave Rishi Sunak, who seems weirdly confident that he can hear all these amendments? And, to be frank, we're going to hear a day of amendments today and another day of amendments ideas tomorrow. And then there's the full-on vote. And Rishi Sunak is kind of, in one regard, playing the long game. He's saying, I'm not really going to budge, because if I move to the right, then I'll also have to move to the left. But this whole question of what happens when people on your payroll, literally the people that you've elected to be your deputy chairs, just decide that they don't like your policy.
Well, we're joined now on the line by Sir Charles Walker, Conservative MP for Broxbourne, who's had some harsh words in the past for some of these rebel Conservative MPs. Sir Charles, what should happen if you want to rebel and you are Lee Anderson and you're deputy chair of the Conservative Party? Is that problematic for Rishi Sunak?
There is a problem because deputy party chairs count as part of the payroll vote, which has expanded over the past 60 years to include not just ministers, but parliamentary private secretaries who are unpaid, as well as deputy chairs and vice chairs of the Conservative Party, because they're appointed by the Prime Minister. So if today they support amendments which the government has asked its backbenchers and ministers to oppose, then they're in opposition to their Prime Minister and their government, and they should resign their positions.
If they don't?
Then they should be removed by the Chief Whip from those positions. It's as simple as that. You can't vote against your government if you hold what is called a payroll position, if you're there at the patronage of your Prime Minister.
And presumably then, if Rishi Sunak doesn't call for their resignation or fire them himself, it just makes the Prime Minister look weak, and that those people who are part of the payroll are now ungovernable.
Well, I think it's very bad for morale, because there has to be a consequence if you have a payroll position for not supporting your government. Now, I've voted against my party on a number of occasions since 2010, but from the position of just being a backbench member of Parliament. And I do think these conventions need to be respected. As you know, Theresa May during the Brexit votes allowed some of her ministers to vote against her deals that she was bringing to the House. And that does corrode morale, party morale, when people who are behaving themselves, supporting the government, see people in privileged positions getting away with quite frankly what many would regard as nonsense, and that is breaking the whip.
I guess Lee Anderson could argue his role is the link to the wider party membership, who probably do support a stronger Rwanda policy than the one Rishi Sunak's offering. So, in fact, we were hearing from Simon Clarke on the programme yesterday, who said, look, I represent the people of Middlesbrough. They tell me what they want, and I have to listen to the people who voted me in.
No, I disagree with that. We're elected to exercise our judgment on the big issues of the day. So if Simon genuinely believes, which I'm sure he does, that the bill needs toughening up, then he shouldn't need to be persuaded to that by his constituents. It's his name on the ballot paper. But as far as Lee Anderson is concerned, Lee is entirely within his rights to support an opposition that the government doesn't want supported. But it is the convention that you don't do that from a payroll position. So he can argue what he likes, but I'm afraid it makes whipping a party almost impossible if colleagues who are following the whip see those, as I say, in privileged payroll positions not following that whip, getting away with it and not being sanctioned. It just doesn't, you have a breakdown of discipline entirely if that happens.
Is it people who are thinking perhaps about their own individual seats and maybe the work that they can carry on doing there, even if their party as a whole doesn't win?
What happened in between 92 and 97 is a lot of Conservative MPs set themselves up in opposition to their Prime Minister, John Major, and their party. And none of them prospered by doing that. In fact, many found that the swing against them was bigger than those that had towed the line. I mean, it's very difficult if you're in opposition to your own party at a general election to say, vote Conservative, when lots of rank and file Conservative voters will say, well, why should we vote for a party that you can't even support? It's not a good seat winning strategy. I know people might think it is, but it really isn't.
Charles Walker, thank you so much. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys. Thanks.
So, as Sir Charles puts it there, you either have the corrosion of parliamentary behaviour and morale, or you take the tough decision, which is you've got to sack Lee Anderson. And at the moment, it looks like Rishi Sunak is going for, well, let's wait and see, and doesn't want to force a confrontation with his deputy chair, which makes the Prime Minister look so weak.
I mean, the problem is that Sunak has got a big political problem on his right. He's got a political, partly out of his own making, as we've said, emphasising this so relentlessly, but he's got a political problem on immigration, both legal and illegal, and arguably the legal bit is even harder for him than the illegal bit. And so, from his point of view, or from Number 10's point of view, to be seen to be sacking a guy who is tough on those issues, whatever the rights and wrongs of what he's saying, is to compound that political problem, because then it makes it look as if you are actually even weaker or even softer on these issues than his critics are claiming. And that is the political problem he's got. And I think the big political question over the next 24 hours for me is basically Number 10 are going around saying that they think when push comes to shove, there are actually no more than 5 to 10 people who will vote against the government in terms of the crucial votes on these amendments. The big question for the next 24 hours is Number 10 right? Are the whips right? Do they have the numbers? Because if they don't, and they were to lose one of these votes or come really close to losing one of these votes, then that becomes a big political problem for Sunak, his authority, and it starts to ricochet and cascade out of control.
Yeah, there are already some talking about the third reading of the bill becoming a vote of confidence in the Prime Minister. Now, would you want to do that? We've spoken about this before. Would you want to express a vote of confidence or no confidence in the Prime Minister if he could then just turn around and say, you do realise, I can take you into a general election right now if you don't want me to stick around, right?
But look, what's so interesting is that if you talk to some of the would-be rebels, and let's see if it's 5 or 10, or let's see if it's many more, they just despair. Not that Rishi Sunak gets the policy wrong, but that he gets the politics wrong. That he is politically inept and clumsy and clunky. And I was hearing someone saying, you don't just elect someone because they're very clever, which is what the Conservative Party seemed to go for in choosing Rishi Sunak after Liz Truss. You go for the person who's the most politically adept and agile and capable and who can see round corners and can see where there are risks coming. And the view is, among a lot of people on the Conservative benches, that Rishi Sunak is politically clumsy.
Look, he was the emergency button don't forget. It wasn't like there was a whole line of people. They had Liz Truss. She was cataclysmically bad. And when she left, he was the one that had to step in. I don't think that the MPs would have necessarily gone for Rishi Sunak if they could choose between anyone they wanted.
And I think there is a sort of bigger problem that Sunak faces, which is, and that any would-be leader would face, which is, with every passing day, every passing week, and particularly we saw, one of the big themes of last year is that the Conservative Party has just become increasingly ungovernable. And one of the reasons it's become ungovernable is it simply isn't certain what it's for anymore. It isn't even certain how to frame the problem. And it hasn't got any real sense of how it's got to this point. They're all looking around and agree on one thing, which is there's this feeling that the last 13, 14 years has not conclusively moved the country in a conservative direction, in their own view. The problem is, though, is that they all mean slightly different things when they talk about conservative and conservatism. And with that kind of level of internal fracture, it just becomes more and more difficult to actually sort of chart a course for Sunak. And so I think in a way, John, what you're saying when people say he's not political or he's bad at politics, I would agree he is. But one of the fundamental problems is because he's not answering that question, is what his sort of conservatism is, and he really didn't answer that in 2023.
He might just be calling their bluff on this one, and I'm prepared to give him the benefit of the doubt that he's worked out that a Rwanda bill is better than no Rwanda bill if you're going to take something to the country that says we're stopping the boats.
Well, it is also worth bearing in mind that although he's dealing with internal political problems, and I still think that the prospect of a potential challenge against him, particularly around the May local elections, I think is still a bit underpriced. But actually, in terms of we talk about the five families all the time, right? Or they've started to refer to themselves.
We don't. We find that ridiculous and overblown and slightly sick-making.
But they themselves have started, some of the particularly more frenzied people in the Tory party have started talking about the five families. The other five families you can talk about are the five conservative-oriented newspapers. So, the Times, the Telegraph, the Sun, the Mail, the Express. It's quite interesting that apart from the Telegraph, they're all still weighing in behind Sunak. They've all had editorials in the last 24 hours or so urging the rebels in either lukewarm or strident terms and everything in between to back down and rally around Sunak. So it's interesting that the institutional support in the press, at least around Sunak, is holding firmer than his political support, at least within parts of the Conservative Party.
I think that the Telegraph, though, yesterday was really quite...
Telegraph is more strident, yeah.
Really extraordinary, and there's a whole separate drama going on with the Telegraph, which we should probably talk about in one of the episodes coming up, about who the new owners should be and is it a threat if it's taken over by...
We did that one when you weren't here.
Oh, did you?
When you're on one of your holidays.
I'm surprised you don't download everything that you miss.
Emily, before I
go
to bed, I played little tapes of you and Lewis speaking.
Tapes? With like tapes. Actual physical tapes.
Yeah,
you pops the cassette in the car.
That's nice. Press Betamax as well.
And sometimes I hit fast forward and I press rewind if I've missed a bit.
Good. We should hear from Robert Jenrick in the House of Commons, who has been critiquing this bill. This is what he said today.
I want to stop the boats and secure our borders. This is a difficult issue, but we're not a parish council struggling with some kind of intractable legal issue. We're a sovereign parliament. The power is in our hands. We have agency. The law is our servant, not our master. I would urge all right honourable and honourable members to support the amendments in my name and those of my honourable friend, the member for Stone, and create a scheme that actually works. That's what our constituents expect of us. That is the promise that the Prime Minister has made to them and the whole country.
I think key bit there was his saying that the law is our servant and not our master. And in a way, whatever again you think about that, that is kind of one of the fissures that goes through the Conservative Party now. It has been basically since Brexit. It is this endless argument and tussle about sovereignty and the endless assertion of parliamentary sovereignty over almost anything else, whether that is the courts, whether that's the international law, whatever it happens to be, international institutions. That is the kind of fissure and one part of the Conservative Party which constantly wants to assert that parliamentary sovereignty over those other things. Just in terms of the detail of what Jenrick's saying, we shouldn't forget, in just thinking about the politics, like how stringent and doctrinaire like some of these proposals are. I mean, Jenrick's amendment would basically only allow a matter of days before someone arriving in the country, before their basic automatic deportation to Rwanda, if they were to question or try and take up an appeal to what has happened to them, they would have to do so in Rwanda. And that is, first of all, that would be a real departure from anything we've had
Yeah, I'd like
before.
to see the 150 judges getting on a flight to Rwanda to go and do their appeal process there.
Well,
right?
quite. That's one of the sort of critiques of what Jenrick is suggesting is, well, once you've removed them to Rwanda, realistically, what prospect is there of them ever really being able to question what's happened to them and get a different result? But, I mean, that is just a really massive departure from anything we've had before. Indeed, Jenrick doesn't resile from that. He says that's what's necessary to get this to work, because otherwise our whole system gets backlogged automatically.
I mean, they are legislators. It is in the name that they are helping to create the laws of the country. Why would you have so little respect for the laws that we are part of, that you basically think that...
Because they're inconvenient and they think that we're in charge, we're the political masters, and there is not that overwhelming respect. I mean, you remember the Daily Mail front cover of naming the judges who had dared to challenge Boris Johnson.
Enemies of the people.
Yeah, enemies of the people.
prorogation.
And you think, oh, wow, if this is what we have come to as a nation, where we don't respect the rule of law, then, wow, it's a kind of strange place that we're in. And interestingly, Isaac Levido, who is the kind of election guru for the Conservative Party and running the campaign for the next general election, spoke to Tory backbenchers, I think, last night and called them all in and said, the path at the moment to victory is narrow and steep. And every time you go out and rebel against the government and we look like we're disunited, it gets narrower and steeper. And all the Tory MPs there go, yeah, Isaac, you're absolutely right, spot on, that's absolutely right. And then go out and sign the amendments to rebel against the government.
I don't know how much Isaac Levido is getting paid to say that, but I'm not an election guru, and it's pretty
you
bloody
are.
obvious.
Don't
I'm just
do yourself
saying,
down.
Isn't it extraordinary that they cannot see that themselves? They cannot see that a party that bickers is not particularly attractive to an
Because
electorate.
they've got
for
away
exactly
with it
the
for ye-
reasons
but
that
they've got
Charles
away-
Walker said, which is that as soon as you are arguing with yourselves, it becomes much harder to turn around to somebody and say, wouldn't you like to vote for us?
But one, it's become part of the DNA that Tories are organised against each other, and they are not just fighting the benches opposite, but they're fighting each other in factional fighting. And also, I think the reason that they ignore that is that up until now, let's face it, the battles over Europe have been going on since John Major's time, arguably Thatcher's time.
And the right has won them.
And the right has won them every time. And they've still managed, apart from 97, to win elections when there are huge battles going on within the Conservative Party.
Yeah.
But the fundamental problem that Sunak is facing, and again it goes back to that question about what sort of conservatism he wants to embody, is that he's hemorrhaging votes from the left and the right. And basically I think since Boris Johnson, and this would have been true of Truss as well, I don't actually think that the Conservative Party has had any real sense of the voters and coalition that it wants to assemble. And one of the weird things for me about the Conservative Party since 2019 is that I actually think Boris Johnson, for all of his faults, was one of the only politicians, senior Conservative politicians, who was very clear-eyed about what the 2019 coalition was and what it would have taken to sustain it, and the very different form of conservatism that you would have needed. Liz Truss certainly didn't embody that. She embodied a kind of ersatz Thatcherism from the 80s, and Sunak has seemed similarly clueless about how to sustain that coalition, and if he's not going to sustain that one, which coalition, electoral coalition, he's going to try and aim for. And essentially, I just think they've been at sea since that point.
Another part of the whole political calculation that needs to be looked at is the boundary changes. There's been an analysis out today of what they will mean for the next general election, and the news is pretty severe for Labour. That's coming up after the break. We're going to talk swing because we are...
Get your car keys out.
Yeah. I knew you'd go there with that predictable joke of swingers.
Oh, whatever.
Whatever.
You still chuckle.
From the
That's
man
all
who
I
can't
want.
drive.
And from
I want to see your car keys.
Yeah. No. Well, that's ideal.
No one
playing
wants
this
to
game,
lose his
particularly in
car
this
keys.
room at
I'll
the moment.
tell you what, the last thing you'd ever want is to give Lewis Goodall your car keys if he can't bloody drive.
Well, yeah. Are we still talking about the Swingers Party now, or are we just...
We've just gone on to an attack on...
leathering me.
Well, it's so much fun leathering you.
I know. Come on, this is supposed to be the fun bit, talking about the boundary change.
I know, this is your idea
So the
of
boundary
heaven.
changes.
So it's very exciting for us because we get very nerdy about these things. But the boundary changes are basically what happens every 10 years after there is a census, and the Electoral Commission come along and they redraw the boundaries of constituencies, 650 constituencies. You need 326 for a majority in the House of Commons. And as a result of population changes, every 10 years they withdraw them. And so you spare a thought for your old MP, you've been sat there nursing a constituency year after year after year, you finally get elected, and then the Boundary Commission comes along and they basically redraw it. And you find that once you used to have a majority of like 10,000, and then you have a majority of 2,000 on the new boundaries, or maybe you have no majority at all. And there's been analysis today conducted by all the broadcasters to show that this is going to make Keir Starmer's tasks, because there are new boundaries which basically favour the Conservatives more, because places like the South East and so on have gained seats, and areas of the country which have lost population, a bit more Labour oriented, have lost seats.
Under these boundary changes, if you'll permit us to go back to the slightly old-fashioned metric of universal swing, then Labour needs more than 12%, 12.7% swing. Boris Johnson...
To get an overall majority,
of
a
one.
simple
to get
overall majority of one.
Exactly, to get one. So Blair, I think, got 10, just over 10. That was in 1997. That won him a huge Commons majority. These things are never quite sort of equable, if you like. But I think people have suddenly woken up to the idea that for all the Telegraph's poll, shall we call it the David Frost poll, saying, oh, Rishi Sunak's going to face a wipeout, a 1997 style, oh, it's going to be terrible unless he changes his mind on Rwanda. Actually, the hill to climb for Labour, with the new boundary changes, with everything that they still have to do, is really tough. And actually, you heard yesterday on the episode from Simon Clarke, who said he's not facing people in his seat talking about Labour. Nobody is that interested in Labour. In Middlesbrough, they're talking about reform as an alternative, because Labour is not yet a popular party on the doorstep in the kind of constituencies that he represents.
He would say that a bit, wouldn't he? In the sense that he is wanting to alert the Conservative Party nationally to the danger of reform
the right, not the left.
on the right,
Yeah.
and the fact that they could get 6,000 or 7,000 votes in an election and deprive a whole bunch of Conservative MPs their seats on the back of Labour not doing particularly much better than they did in the last general election. And that is obviously a real possibility. The other thing about the universal swing thing, which again, is that people are much more aware of tactical voting now than they were in the days of Peter Snow and Bob Mackenzie, when they had their swingometer board behind them. Because I think that, people will identify the seats and what you need to do. If you want to get MP X out of that constituency, this is how you need to vote.
So to get a majority of one, as we said, swing of over 12%, Attlee didn't get that, Blair didn't get that. Which seats?
I mean, a swing of 12.7%. I think it was originally just under 12%.
Yes, so
it's almost
even harder.
1 percentage point more.
It's really, really hard. Which seat on a universal swing,
Labour needs to win.
Labour would have to win to get a majority of one on that basis.
I think
Here's a clue. It used to be a seat held by a Commons Speaker.
Oh, I know. It's Buckinghamshire.
Buckingham and Betchley.
Buckingham
and Betchley, which
I
again,
didn't even know
not
that name.
natural.
Labour
No, it's a new one. It's a new. See, so they rename
I
them
think it was
sometimes
not just
as well.
a speaker, but also a dolphin stood there once.
Well, Nigel Farage stood there. Yeah, that's
against
true.
a dolphin.
Well, right, okay, good. All part of the fun of British general elections. Will there be any sea life standing this time?
What these quiz questions throw up is just no one's.
A Sea Ray is standing in Lancashire South West. I mean, I think what this reaffirms as well for Labour is the importance of Scotland, that getting a good result, that actually really managing to stage a revival in Scotland, where currently, of course, they have 2 seats. Last general election, they only won 1 seat, won a by-election since then, is so important. But actually, to really win serious seats in Scotland, you need a universal swing, which is even larger, about 25% away from the SNP. And then you have to, of course, focus in. And then the other factor, of course, to bear in mind, though, which is that electorates we know are more volatile now than they used to be. We've seen that time again. We saw it in 2019 with the crumbling of the Red Wall. We saw it in 2015 in Scotland when all those Labour seats went. So I think, although it is true that history is not on Labour's side with regards to this in so many ways, that it is a monumentally difficult task just to get majority of one, you can say with the volatility of electorates these days, and the fact you've already alluded to it, John, about tactical voting, maybe the Lib Dems doing well in the south as well, that the task will become easier than perhaps it would have been.
I do have a point to make, but I just need to make you aware of the dynamics in the studio. That all the time that you've been speaking, Emily hasn't been listening. She has been trying to find a
nothing
picture.
new there.
No, I
She
had
has
the
been-
picture of the dolphin.
of the
She's
dolphin.
she's found the picture of a candidate
why?
dressed up as
This
a
is the
dolphin.
serious
your
stuff.
quiz question.
Go on then.
Why was a dolphin standing against John Bercow?
Why was it? Well, not actually a coast in Buckingham last time I checked, so hard to... dolphin.
There you go. That's the picture.
Okay, not really
It
working
was
in the old podcast.
about
Flipper.
flipping
Flipper.
his expenses. That was what they used to say to MPs that had
Dolphins
changed
have
their.
flippers?
Yes, they do. MPs changed their
They
primary
called him Flipper.
residence.
That was the song from my childhood. King of the ocean. No one.
We can't go back that. You didn't have music
It's
back
far-
then,
Guess
John.
what?
We know
The
that.
dolphin did not win. Yeah.
Yeah.
So enough of the Bercow, the Buckinghamshire, the boundaries, and the dolphin.
Yeah, that's a shame the dolphin didn't begin with a B because you've had perfect alliteration.
The
there.
dolphin.
The dolphin. Exactly.
We're back in a minute.
So there's another electoral contest, of course, that has been captivating our attention in Iowa, in the Hawkeye state, with the first caucus, the first electoral test, and Donald Trump. Well, I think he blew everyone away, really.
The world's
What is
most
a
boring.
Hawkeye? Is it a bird?
It's a dolphin.
Of course.
It's a
with a
dolphin.
flipper.
Yeah,
I've got a Hawkeye
No, a lot of
dolphin.
people know the first Iowa caucus starred a dolphin. I'm not sure if it's the same one that stood against Bercow, but
Exactly. We've got a whole episode on Iowa, what happened, what it means for those who are left, what it means for the presidential election as a whole. You can find us on Newsagents USA.
A Hawkeye is just someone who's got keen eyesight, apparently.
No.
Yeah.
Is that all the Iowans could think of to describe themselves?
Well, that's
back
what
when they became
I
a
don't know
state?
why the origin of it is.
Tell you what, it might be flat, but we've got 20/20 vision.
Yeah, okay. We'll be putting into focus what happened in the Hawkeye state.
Beautifully done.
Ethanol and sharp
Beautifully
eyesight. That's what the Iowans have got.
That's
Jesus.
why we pay them the big bucks.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.